Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Mindplex Pubcast. Today we are here live with Ben Gortzel. Say hi, Ben. All right,
Hey.
and our and our guest Tyson Yunkaporta. Say hi. All right, and Megan Kelleher. Say hello.
Hey. G'day, everyone.
And yeah, they are married and are both researchers. So Tyson is the author of Sand Talk.
We're still in our long engagement, by the way.
Oh, what?
You know, we talked a year ago.
You're not married?
Still engaged. No,
you're spreading misinformation on live TV.
Come on. You said it was your wife. Wait a minute.
We're living in
talking for over a year now, and I didn't know.
Well,
it was like
she's my wife in our way, but the state doesn't recognize it yet. We got to do a thing.
Oh, yeah.
Why did I decide to emphasize that for no particular reason at the beginning of the show? I will never know, but you just chalk it up to those decisions you wish you didn't make. So anyway, so the point is, you both do very interesting research in indigenous philosophies into not always what you would think of as indigenous technologies, like in Megan's case, blockchain governance, and these things are connected in very, very interesting ways. So what I'd like to do is just let you both sort of introduce yourselves a little bit. We've had the podcast for those that have had a chance to use it. And then
actually what I would like to do, just in the interest of having a fun, productive conversation. Actually, you mentioned blockchain governance. We didn't focus on that so much in the actual podcast that we're supposedly promoting here, but it happens to be something heavily on my mind lately because of things happening in SingularityNET. So it would actually be fun to have a chat on that topic, although we can bounce on whatever topic comes up.
It is a little hard to hear you guys. There's some singing in the background and some other stuff.
That's our daughter.
Which is lovely. But is there?
Yeah, they're gonna try and get on top of that in a minute.
Okay, no problem.
We got the big ones looking after the little ones, and
I hear you just fine. But yeah, I think maybe if I'm rambling on and you're not talking, just mute your mic. Then it's not heard when I'm talking, and if it goes on talking, we'll just live with it.
It's not a big deal. Just in case there was a door that could be shut or something like that. That's all. That's the only reason why I bring it up. I'm the producer. I have to. All right. So
yeah.
So Ben, you said in the interest of a productive and something or other, you wanted to. Did you want to start at a certain place? You want to jump to the blockchain governance stuff? Because we basically didn't have a chance to talk about that during the podcast.
Yeah, we didn't. So yeah, let me outline for a moment why that's on my mind currently, and we can use that as a jumping off point. So
sounds good.
We last talked, and in the lengthy delay between recording the podcast and actually putting it online, which I apologize for, but that's because we've just been getting this podcast off the ground. Our time lags aren't so long going forward. But anyway, in this lag between recording our initial podcast with you guys and me and the robot, and today, obviously a lot of things have happened in the world. In particular, the AI world has gone nuts, right? So I mean, we've had OpenAI come out with ChatGPT, which is, it's very far from an AGI. It's not a sentient being. On the other hand, it's very, very smart in its own way, and it can do a lot of the stuff that people can, at least when you put people in front of a keyboard and have them type. I think it will have a huge impact on the economy in the sense that it's hard to say what is the percentage, but I mean, I could see there are variations on GPT-4 type technology taking over 70-80% of jobs that people do, even though the system is not fundamentally innovative, self-aware, or creative. I mean, vast majority of things people get paid to do are not
that involve
creative or
conversation.
innovative, and
that involve conversation.
Nor they.
That's all it can do is write sentences. So it can't really do what people can do. That's all I'm mincing words about.
I wish it could. Like the other people always want me to write things.
But it can do a lot of what people do for a living.
Well, the other day I got a request to like write a quick 1,500 words, on I think it was on indigenous notions of time. And so I just went, I haven't got time to do this. So I went to ChatGPT and I said, can you write, this many words on this topic in the voice of Tyson Yunkaporta? And it went, sure. And it was like an extended Hallmark card. It's really annoying. I want it to be able to do my job for
me. It's extremely banal, yes.
So the information was correct, but it was written in a boring way. I just want to be clear. Was the information even correct? Okay, not even. Okay, great.
It was like someone just did a compilation of fridge magnets.
Okay, great.
Inspirational.
It's pretty irritating. But if you say, I'm going to Melbourne.
You could have given it some of your papers first. Sorry, go ahead.
It's probably read those, but the point I was going to make is if you tell I'm going to Melbourne with my wife and my kids age 5 and 2 for 4 days in the month of July, what sites should I see? It will do a very good job, right? So I mean, it really depends how. It's just doing a clever weighted average.
When you feed in the information ahead of time, it does a great job too. I've actually been using it to help me. Yeah. If you give it the exact in the prompt, if you give it the exact information,
you can do that too. Yeah, of course.
Write me a paragraph about that or ask questions about that. It can do that in the chunks, right? But
I'm not sure that would work for the indigenous notion of time, which is a very abstract.
If I fed in a bunch of Tyson's writing first, maybe that's all I'm saying.
Well, I for my own experimentation with it, that it would do well at that actually, but I mean it does.
His style.
It does well at things that are well represented in the training data. So in programming languages, for example, if you ask it to code in Rolang or some obscure programming language, which is covered in like one GitHub repo, it won't even get the syntax right. But if you ask it to go to Python or C++, which are massively represented in the corpus it was trained on, it will do very well. So I mean the nature of that algorithm is, it's munging together a huge number of things. So if you give it a prompt which requires it to vary in a certain way on things that are very widely represented in its training data, it'll do fine. But if you give it a prompt which is stuff that doesn't touch stuff in its training database too well, it won't do well. But anyway, the point I was coming to is, while this stuff is not AGI, I am seeing ways I can use that to accelerate progress toward AGI using quite different algorithms. So for example, we're working now on using large language models to translate all of Wikipedia into predicate logic. So we can translate all of Wikipedia into logical relationships, feed them into a reasoning engine. Now that's also not AGI, but it will give us something that can do some quite complex mathematical and scientific reasoning on what's in Wikipedia, right? And then the results of that reasoning can help guide agents doing various things. So all in all, I do feel like the odds of really, really smart systems coming sooner feel even to me now than they did when we last talked. I mean, I've been an optimist about the timing of getting really smart machines all along. My optimism on the timing has even increased.
Has increased?
Both because I think it's increased because I think we can use large language models as one component of an AGI system, even if not the main component, a very useful one, but also because these are sort of an object lesson in what happens with scale, right? So, I mean, we had an algorithm, transformers, that were kind of interesting, and you just scale them up in processor and data, and then, whoa, they're doing a lot of other really cool stuff. So then, okay, what happens with a logic engine? What happens with an evolutionary learning engine? What happens with artificial chemistry, right? What happens with many other things when you scale them up comparably, right? So this is quite interesting. And in terms of SingularityNET, it makes me feel like, whoa, maybe we are only like, let's say 3 years from a human level thinking machine by taking OpenCog, take large language models, make them control little robots bopping around, make them control agents in virtual worlds, let them learn from their experience. But if the more I feel like it's possible, we might get a machine that's really, really smart on the level of a person, even if not in the exact way as a person, within a few years. That makes me want to accelerate the movement of SingularityNET toward fully decentralized governance, like as quickly as I can. Because if we really have a possibility to like launch the world's first thinking machine 3 years from now, or even if it's 5 years from now, right? I mean, I really want that to be controlled by everyone and no one, right? That should be controlled clean, and then it not meaning necessarily U.S. style voting, but it should be some sort of participatory democratic. Well, it's U.S. style voting has its issues. It seems better than most alternatives in the world at the moment.
No electoral college. Anyway, that's all I meant. That was an electoral college.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that's right. The electoral college was supposed to be a kind of liquid democracy, right? And it got perverted into something quite different. Yes. So then, I mean, so SingularityNET. I mean, we have SingularityNET Foundation, we have Hypercycle, we have a number of associated blockchain networks. Each of them is decentralized in a way, but in effect, the governance there is $1, one vote, right? Because that's how tokenomic networks come out. Now, one has other problems, like crypto people don't like to be doxxed. They don't like to have to give their ID and upload it, and it's generally becomes an obstacle for people in different parts of the world who don't want to upload their passport, right? So what's the right way to actually do decentralized governance? It seems like some sort of reputation system is one route, where a person or entity in the network, you know, they've shown some history in the network, they have some contribution in the network, others in the network will vouch for them, so you want to give them some governance oomph, right? I mean, that's one possible bit, but then that has its own issues. Like, people can try to game the reputation system, like the way you game getting a 5-star rating on your Airbnb or something, right? Like you get all your 100 closest friends to give you a 5-star rating and so forth. So but yet somehow getting that right that's the best sort of solution I can think of. So from a math view, I've been thinking about, like, what are the properties of reputation systems that you want to have for them to work, and it becomes tricky because most of these are properties on the emergent level rather than like the atomic level. They're like, what properties do you want the whole network to have? Now, from an indigenous context, you guys could speak to that better than me, but it's quite different, where you have like a stable group of people who all know each other for a long period of time, and then you have sort of implicit reputation networks where different people have different reputations in different aspects and participate in governance in different ways in accordance with that. Of course, in the modern world as a whole, you have people with different cultures in different places who've never seen each other and don't even speak the same language, right? So seems like a big challenge we need to meet in the next couple years at a greatly accelerated rate if we want to have truly decentralized governance of AI, right? And we did a event on this, a decentralization summit a couple months ago, just with the aim of pulling together like thoughts from SingularityNET community, how to do this, and we'll be organizing working groups and so forth. But it seems so a hard problem, right? Like, as you see, Megan, if you've studied blockchain-based governance, I mean, most DAOs are not really DAOs, right? Most DAOs are just DeFi scam, and the voting is controlled by one guy or three guys who own most tokens in a one token per vote system, right? So it seems it's a very hard thing to get right. So, but it'd be great to hear some of both of your guys' thoughts in this general area.
Yeah, it's really fascinating just hearing. I wish I had an answer for you in short, is where I'll start. And I kind of don't, but what I have
we'll take the long one. That's okay.
Yeah, I just have some kind of insights that have been born out of, workshops and conversations that I've had, and then other, sort of reading that I've done. And yeah, it gets back to the, so you talked about how people game the system. You also talked about, I suppose, where you have large numbers of people who don't even know each other and have never met, and they kind of have a say over something that they may not necessarily have a stake in. One of the workshops that I did, I kind of set up a scenario where I could ask a question about, I was trying to get an insight into, so I kind of created a game where I was asking questions about, asking the participants questions about, how they felt about certain landmarks that were on this map. So I talked last time in the podcast about how I was using a spatial verification technology, or I was situating the research in this spatial verification technology, blockchain technology. And I used that, I selected that for the research because of the fact that it's effectively like an abstraction of land. So the map being an abstraction of place, which to me seemed, a logical kind of entry point for discussing, Indigenous governance matters, because we're talking about place. And so, rather than kind of just jumping straight into this particular blockchain application, which, if you've never had any kind of experience with, crypto or blockchain, or, if there was kind of multiple layers that you had to sort of navigate to be able to work with this particular application. The entry point that I used was to kind of just create a game. So I just did this sort of like mud map using, a paint application and just created little sort of icons and signs around the place that were actually deliberately provocative, and kind of asked, I suppose, kind of like provoked, you would sort of look at things and say, oh, okay, well, I don't like the way that that's named, or I don't like the way that that's represented. And then there were like tokens, so there were stakes that were, labeled against each of the particular points on this map. And so I used that I set that up to provoke conversation, to kind of get an emotional response effectively. But that emotional response would be filtered through a cultural framework, because each of the participants has got, a solid enough cultural background that I knew that at some point their protocols would kick in to kind of, I suppose, inform the decisions that they would make based on how they would either change, what they would do to make changes on that particular map in that landscape, and whether they would work together, And so one of the really interesting things that kind of came out of that particular activity was when the map went from, I flipped from, the mud map, this game that I'd created, to an actual sort of like a screenshot of a mapping application that people use broadly, without naming particular corporations. And so that particular sort of screenshot featured a territory or an area that encompassed my ancestral homelands. And I chose that because I thought, well, I can sort of take the hit, I guess, culturally, if it was just a workshop, so there's no sort of, nobody made any decisions or anything, but I just didn't want to go using somebody else's kind of even a picture of somebody else's land. I didn't want to go doing that. So there's my cultural protocols kind of kicking in. And so when this area sort of when I showed this to people and I asked the question, does this change the stakes? Now you're not looking at a mud map anymore. You're looking at an actual area. And they just straight away went, yeah, totally. It totally changes the stakes. And so, I asked the question, what changes for you? And they said, well, it's not my country, so I'm going to step back. And this particular game that I, created has 3 levels of engagement. So, the sort of base level is you can just kind of look at this particular area and just consume the information. Or if you, you can buy tokens, and then you can vote on, information. So you can sort of, I suppose, say yes or no, this is correct or whatever. And then the top layer is you can, that's kind of like this, the top ranking sort of governance layer, and there's a higher level of investment sort of thing. And so it made, by changing the stakes, it made people want to kind of change their ownership stakes. They wanted to either say, okay, well, I would, in this particular area where I don't have any cultural sort of stake, I suppose, or cultural authority, I would step back. I would step down to the lowest rank. But if it was an area where they had a particular cultural authority, then they would want to get in and start being able to kind of make changes because they have that cultural authority. So that was an interesting sort of finding, that there was a sort of a change to the I suppose tokenomics, I guess, or the tokenomics kind of, they were suggesting to me that you would have to have qualifications. You would need to have certain kinds of merits, I suppose, to qualify for certain stakes to be able to make changes to, that governance arrangement. And a separate kind of piece of research that sort of supports that is there's an anthropologist by the name of Deborah Bird Rose, and she's looked at totem as kind of like an institutional governance kind of mechanism within within Aboriginal governance, within Aboriginal communities, and and how so totem is something that you're assigned through kinship, and it gives you obligations and responsibilities to, as I was talking about in the last podcast, to certain entities. It gives you, let's say your totem is eagle. Your responsibility is to go and learn everything about that particular, about eagle. Where does it nest? When does it, what are its breeding cycles? How do I ensure that it has enough food? And there are all of these obligations that are upon you culturally. And that also kind of links out into other entities within the system. But it also links out to other people within the network. And when I say the network, I mean within your clan group, within neighboring tribal groups. So your kind of business on that particular landscape, you can't make decisions within a particular tribal area unless you have the buy-in or the sign-off from people in neighboring tribal areas, because it keeps you in check effectively. So you've got to make sure that your business on your tribal area doesn't effectively kind of do bad or what's the word, kind of negatively impact people in neighboring tribal areas. So, and that actually kind of spans out right across the entire continent. So it's just a really interesting kind of what, you would probably call fractal governance.
So one thing that popped into my head, I mean, a number of thoughts popped into my head while talking them. You were talking them, sort of taking them in reverse order here. But this last mechanism you said actually made me reflect the differences between most indigenous culture situations and our current situation, because relatively speaking, indigenous culture was more steady state-ish or periodic-ish, right? Where, I mean, the Australian indigenous way of life remained vaguely similar for like 60,000 years or something, right? And whereas now we're seeing things change substantively within decades. So it seems like
there's it's about that governance. It's not about slow progress, but it's about having protocols in place to ensure that every new innovation is accompanied by an appropriate social technology that will ensure that new innovation. This is really important. This is really important, Ben. Listen, give us a minute. It's that the social technology that accompanies your new innovation has to ensure that new innovation will never be weaponized. So for example, my people have a very deadly weapon. It's a massive sword that's made out of the blade of a sawfish, and it's something potentially that could have, it could have resulted in over 1,000 years or so, everyone being wiped out and lots of deaths. So, the affordance that our law builds into this is that it only has a tiny handle. So it's actually really hard to swing. If you put like a samurai sword handle on that, then, you'd be looking at a very different culture here today. But we have we have to have those affordances built into the technologies to limit how they can be weaponized. We also have to, we have to make sure there's accompanying social technologies that will prevent it from, becoming weaponized and actually causing harm to our descendants and the systems in which we live. So it's I guess you could think of it in slow tech, in terms of slow tech, by comparison.
Well, I mean, I think it's
what's happening now,
but conservative in the literal sense, right? I mean, it's looking at not making a change unless you have some reasonable confidence the change will not be destructive and disruptive in any major way, which is sort of the opposite of Mark Zuckerberg's move fast and break things, right? Which I guess. So the question is,
well, we couldn't even start dating until like our old people let us know that our totems were compatible. For example, we don't get to just go. We don't get to.
On the other hand, when I
are you serious?
Yeah.
Was that a joke or were you serious?
No, serious. No, we had to get approvals to make sure that an eagle girl can be with a boulder boy before we you know, before we start getting serious. Yeah.
No, I mean, much of the world operates that sort of way. I mean, a friend of mine dated an Indian guy, and then his parents consulted a fortune teller about various aspects of their union, and the fortune teller, for whatever reason, commanded them to break up. But they gradually supplied the fortune teller with more information, and over time, fortune teller foresaw a bright future for them. Which, and this was a good 30 years ago. They're still together and reasonably happy, right? So, but I guess
I think a lot of that is, you know, weird feedback loop between the UK and India that sort of has been filtered through, like Madame Blavatsky and people like that for the last.
Madame Blavatsky.
No, I guess so.
I'm
the
a
point
fan.
I was coming to, though, is so whether or not modern society should be following a conservative point of view like that, which is a very big question, whether it should be. And I mean, you could view it from many perspectives.
Or can it
Well,
anyway? Like now you've talked about the swordfish weapon. Now any jerk can go make one and mass produce it if they want.
Well,
you know, like it's not like you can control it once the cat's out of the bag. That's what I worry about. That's what my AI friends worry about with their inventions when if they sell it to the government, let's say for a helpful thing that's supposed to be only used by medics or whatever. But once the technology is there, what's to stop? You know, in this case, it might be the Army or the Navy or somebody that you sold it to anyway.
Culture is what stops it, and it does in many cases. I mean, given the technology that exists right now, you could have a great amount more destructive things happen than ever happened, right? I mean, I could go down to the Walmart and buy many weapons and shoot people, and I don't do it, and in fact, very, very few people do it, right? So I mean, culture and psychology do stop most damaging things that could be done from happening, rather than us needing. I mean, we don't actually.
That's a bad example. In the United States, actually, we have a lot of shootings, and they're going up.
It's a really good example of what you know, where conservatism has gone.
But I know what you mean about criminalizing.
There isn't any conservatism
I mean, it's
really anymore.
It's a true example, though. I mean, yes, there are more shootings than we would like, and it's bad. But I mean, there's a lot more people owning guns than there are people who go around randomly shooting people. And if you look at a more advanced level,
it's about criminalizing behavior instead of the technology.
But they used to be conservative. Now they're incredibly radical. I mean, there's no conservatism there. You can ask Liz Cheney and Mitt Romney, like, you know, exactly how much power they have anymore. There's not a lot of conservative voices in the Western educated, industrialized, democratic culture.
But the point I was trying to come
those
to
conservative voices aren't always conservative on gun control, by the way. That's why I gotta say.
I see, Lisa, this is a hot button issue for you. I shouldn't have mentioned it.
It's not a hot button issue.
So let's drop that one. All right. So
I didn't bring it up. You did.
Hey, you said
I know, and I regret bringing it up because it's becoming a pointless rabbit hole. But
okay.
Hey, let's do women's bodily autonomy.
I really want to hear the end of. I really want to hear your question, Ben. I want to hear it.
I will try once more to complete my sentence. All right. So
my
whether or not we should be following a more conservative path, like modern society as a whole obviously isn't, right? Like new technologies are being introduced without social technologies that will integrate them in a broadly beneficial way. I mean the launch of ChatGPT is one example of that, but there's a tremendous number. I mean, social networks themselves are an example of that. Mobile phones are an example of that, right? I mean, there's endless examples of that. So given that this is the context, we're then looking at crafting democratic, decentralized governance mechanisms for a particular network, SingularityNET or Hypercycle, for example, which is operating within a context of a society that is sort of rushing forward willy-nilly, right? So, I mean, one thing, so there you could say, well, I don't care if society is rushing forward willy-nilly, we're going to be conservative. But then, of course, what will happen then is the people rushing forward willy-nilly are going to be the ones having the dominant effect on the world. And what you have is the knowledge that you were more careful, so you were only causing harm by inaction rather than action, right? On the other hand, you can try to design sort of the best possible governance mechanism, or the best one you can think of, to operate for your little sub-network within this overall context, which is moving forwards in a sort of move fast and break things methodology, which we can't really, like, we can't stop the world from doing that. I can't stop Putin, Chinese government, or Google from doing what they're doing. I can guide what SingularityNET is doing, and it sort of means we need to craft decentralized governance mechanisms that are able to move quickly, or let's say that are able to have a self-adjusted rate of progress, right? Because you may reach a point where the best decision is, well, no, we just do have to slow things down, even if other people are doing whatever they're doing. But you also need to be able to move rapidly in the right circumstance, because that's just the environment that you're in, right? And of course, I mean, indigenous cultures will have their own variant of that. If there's a natural disaster happening, if there's a forest fire, decisions will be made quickly by some governance member or another, right? The difference is here it's not a flood or a forest fire, it's an overall social culture, which is just doing big things very, very quickly all around you. So that's the environment we're operating. I like, the other thing I wanted to go back to is I like the idea of a sort of simulated place of some form is interesting. I mean, we have, like, the decisions that we have to make about governing an AI network are very abstract and hard for most people to think about. And to the extent that you could map them into things that are more intuitive in a reasonably faithful way, that becomes interesting. I mean, I'm remembering some software program. I was trying to remember its name or look it up. I'm remembering some software program where people make a collective decision by, like, moving some buzzing around little insect dots on the screen toward one point or another. So, like, there's 3 decisions that represent points on the screen. Each person can nudge these bees toward one or another, and so you're nudging them, but you're also seeing how other people are nudging them, right? So the difference from a vote is that there's sort of a dynamic process where you're seeing what direction other people are going and what sorts of swarms, and you could decide, well, I really would have liked that dot over there, but no one's pushing over there, so I'm going to just join in the people pushing toward this one over here, which is better than that one. It's logically a little bit like what you have with, like, repeated runoffs in an election, but it's more intuitive and sophisticated, right? But what's interesting there is you're sort of gamifying, which is a word I usually don't like, but it seems to fit there. I mean, you're gamifying the dynamic, interactive part of the decision process, and somehow embedding things in a landscape where people can feel the top has something of that aspect too.
Look, I mean, I guess where indigenous knowledge can help out is not in the small picture sort of things, and how you make a decision when a flood comes or anything like that. It's more the overall architecture kind of choice architecture that sort of goes on in a culture that has holonic fractal checks and balances right down from the smallest unit to the biggest possible scale, because, in our culture, nobody's above or below you. People can have authority over you, but no power. Power is distributed from every man, woman, child, dog, everything, But
so that's
so
a very interesting distinction.
if I can
how would
map out that,
how would you
map out
define
that,
those authority and power?
Yeah,
Great question.
that's and I might leave that to Megs, but authority, yeah, power is the actual decision making. Authority comes with knowledge, and Megs can get deeper into that. But so, for example, she was talking about your totemic responsibilities. You speak for a place, a center, a particular space. It might be a swamp or a ridge or something like that, where that is for your totem. So you speak for that place. If the group moves into that place, then you have authority of knowledge. You can't boss the group around and tell them where they have to go, but the group will defer to your knowledge, while you're there. That's just how that goes. So every single person has authority of knowledge that they inherit. Every single person is sovereign. And this is really important. This is where the concept of the holon comes in, because you are, there isn't a continuum, a politicized continuum that's a constant struggle between the collective and the individual freedom, the interests of the, community interests of the individual, which is how politics is fractured now. No, every single person is both those things at once. You're a holon, and you're limited by the maximum power principle, in that you can only develop, you can only grow, you can only advance to the limit of the other nodes in the system around you. Like the cells in your body, they're gonna all struggle to be the best cell they can be, but only to the limit of the other cells around it and the organ that they're sitting in. And then the wider system of your body, etc. If that cell gets out of line and starts, getting silly ideas, then you got cancer, and it's not very good, So it's and there is an architecture to this. There's a governance structure where there's a name for the law that governs your individual behavior. And that is, actively policed, co-policed by the people around you in your immediate group, and this sort of Dunbars up, from 5 to 50 to 150 to, you know what I mean? It Dunbars up in that scale. So at each level, so then you have your immediate family, your extended family, you have your clan group, you got your totemic group divisions then, which might go across different clans and even different regions, but it keeps scaling up. So you've got checks and balances where nobody can act like that rogue cancerous cell. Everybody must adhere to the maximum power principle. You are completely free, and nobody can ever boss you. You're a sovereign being. However, you're acting within your relational obligations and limitations around you at all times. So your family becomes a unit, then becomes a node in a wider system of your clan. And they're regulated by the other nodes in that clan. Your clan becomes an individual node that is sovereign, can't be bossed by other clans. However, it must adhere to that maximum power principle and can't put itself above other clans. And then then all those together, that's your tribe. And at every level, that law has a different name. So then your tribe, it adheres to that law. But your tribe is a single unit, a single node in a bigger regional system of tribes, which might extend all along a river system, for example, and a catchment area. And that forms one big region. And they must be interdependent in that and adhere to the maximum power principle. And then it just keeps going, because then that region must interact with other ones. But then there's a fail-safe in there, in that every single tribe, every single clan, they have their most sacred knowledge and their language and all their ritual. They have their most sacred knowledge kept by another person from a different tribe, could be 1,000 miles away. and that's kept there because, volcanoes happen, floods happen, meteors happen, and that might need to be recovered. But also it prevents imperialism, because you're trusting your most sacred knowledge and your holiest of holies to another person, from another language group, hundreds of miles away. They hold that there. And then their sacred knowledge, that's held by someone else. So we end up having this interdependent continental system, this commons, that's governed by these checks and balances and these concentric circles of this holonic, fractalized, architecture of governance that continues out and even traditionally governed the way we did international trade with Asia, which was happening for a long time before the Dutch arrived here like 500 years ago, So, that's basically in like a massive nutshell. We've got a thing here called a bunya nut. It's about the size of a basketball. So that's the nutshell that I just put that in.
But that's a distributed model that you describe, having people look out for each other's knowledge.
It's amazing.
Right?
It's very hard to describe it to people. And we're currently, my lab is doing a lot of work trying to apply this in finance to try and crack the nut of how to resolve, biodiversity credits, biodiversity offsets, which has not been working lately. So we've got some interesting ways that we're starting to figure out how to do the data collection and analysis for verification, in that, because verification is where it falls down, even with the carbon credit system, But anyway, we can get into that later. It's a bit more complicated.
Yeah, I think two things occurred to me there. One is the open source software development community works a bit like you described, certainly more so than most things in modern technological culture. I mean, their power follows authority and is sort of bounded by authority, right? So I mean, you get authority by writing good code, or at least writing prototypes and embody good ideas that others turn into great code, and people will follow that because they respect that authority of doing the real stuff that works together with other people's real stuff. But there's there's a limit. I mean, if you're a great coder and you turn into a dictatorial maniac, which has certainly happened, people can fork the code base, go off and do something else. And what's interesting is that's a subset of the modern economy and society that's not centrally money based, right? And so that's probably why you have a case where authority is a more dominating factor. It seems like when money comes in modern capitalism, you get cases where
Gresham's law
authority is far out of balance with power. I mean, Bill Gates and Elon Musk are authorities. They're super talented people. They know a huge amount of stuff, but the amount of power they've accumulated is out of proportion with the relative amount of authority they have because of these increasing returns phenomena that occur in the game theory of a money-driven capitalist system. But it does make me think that one of the sort of design desiderata for a decentralized governance system is you want a system where power is not dramatically disproportionate to authority, right? And in a capitalist economy, it is, because you've got billionaires who so far they're just people like everyone else. They don't have a million times more authority than everybody else just because they have a million times more money. And then in most crypto DAOs, it's also the case, right? I mean, the founders may deserve some extra authority over everyone else, but they don't really deserve dictatorial control over the whole network because of that. So I guess that's part of what you want by a reputation or other similar concept driven decentralized
Well, especially if they've got a reputation for pump and dump schemes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's it erodes their authority over time. I mean, there's only so many.
Well,
times
then you just make up a new sock puppet for your identity, right?
Yeah. There's only so many times you can buy up real estate, like next door to Snoop Dogg, digital real estate, and you know, and not lose the farm over it before you end up going, hang on, I'm not into this metaverse
in the internet land, you can just make up a new identity and do the same scam over again, right? Which is a
can't get your money back though.
Indigenous meat space.
Yeah.
Well, to me, it kind of, what I see is there's almost like a triangle here. So you've got authority and power, and then the third kind of element is trust. And I sort of wonder whether, and I mean, trust is such a huge piece that I'm not like overly informed on, because I know that, you know, Francis Fukushima, is it Francis Fukushima? Is that his name? You know, that massive book, and there's like, you know, libraries of literature on the whole concept of trust. But I kind of wonder whether trustlessness is, I don't know, maybe, I don't know if that's a problematic thing, or, you know, whether it's that can be gained. Like, what is it that, how do you know that you can trust a person's authority or a person's, I don't know. I feel like I'm sort of getting into a space that's, I'm just really asking a question here rather than being able to kind of.
Just
I mean, there could be a
good question.
There could be a cultural aspect wherein, if you're in an environment that's designed not to require trust, this will encourage many people to not bother to act in ways that will foster trust, right? I mean, you certainly, that's certainly one ingredient in the blockchain world. But then you have a lot of trust overlaying it, right? Because why do people put money into a new token project? Because they trust the guy who, or the girl, they trust the person who's behind it, right? So I mean,
word of mouth.
They
trust the narrative,
the reputation
project
of the people.
So,
and narrative is key. And this is what we talked about in the thing too briefly, is story and the importance of story, you know, and briefly mention the concept of right story and like wrong story there as well.
Which is a new book that you have coming out later this year.
I wasn't trying to drop in a plug.
I know you weren't, but I couldn't help myself. I'm sorry.
Look at these disinformation landscapes, you know. Yeah.
That book again was called.
But the yeah, it's the narrative. So people build up narratives around themselves, of course, and that's done in a certain way. You know, at the moment with the kind of technologies and medias that we have, you know. But in our way, there's this idea of right story, and right story is something that's crowdsourced over time, and it's coming from a sentient landscape, and it's coming from all the nodes in that landscape and all the people as nodes in that landscape as well, and it develops over time like that. And so it's there's kind of like this verification system, you know, that happens because it is crowdsourced. In that book, actually, there's a lot of thought experiments in it, because I think that thought experiment is the closest I can come to for a Western genre. It's the closest thing I can come to Aboriginal yarning, because thought experiments are like crowdsourced narratives. You know, the scenario is out there in the world, and then everybody is welcome to come in and do their take, you know, on the prisoner's dilemma or whatever. And that keeps building as a body of knowledge. And, you know, there's kind of consensus that develops around it, you know. So, you know, game theory, you know, comes out of one of these things, and it's a crowdsourced narrative in the end. So, you know, that's the way your right story sort of develops. Wrong stories developed unilaterally, you know, from a think tank or a pack or a bloody, you know, a group of people with an agenda, or, you know, a single person. You know, like, you know, everyone's got one in their family, that gossipy one, that one who makes things up, you know. So wrong story happens, and often it uses real, true facts, or it just takes a true story and like a right story and then puts it in the wrong place, you know, and that's enough to make wrong story happen. So when Me Too first started up, and you'd have women who just basically wanted to reclaim a neighborhood so they could walk the frickin' street without feeling under threat, and they'd be talking about that. And then men would be jumping in the conversation, giving statistics about how many men are raped. You know what I mean? And now that's they're true stats, and that's right story about the sexual violence against men is right story. But putting it in that wrong place, that makes a wrong story. It doesn't belong there. That has an agenda, and that's just to derail someone else who's trying to make themselves safe in a particular environment, So when you look at disinformation landscapes, you're not just looking at fact checking, you're actually looking at right story in the right place, right story in the right context, etc. I have some ideas around ChatGPT too, and cognition around that, indigenous cognition we'll get into after, but I talk for too long now.
No, but the point I would take from that thread would be, apart from the decision mechanisms, if you could get decentralized networks to foster sort of collective narrative building from the minds and hearts of the people in the community, which is related to what you're calling right story, then that narrative becomes what guides the concrete decision making. Because in the end, choosing between option A and option B, I mean, it's important, but it's not even as important as the whole self-organizing sort of collective intelligence cultural process of synthesizing what are those options, right? I mean that's what underlies the old Marxist characterization of Republicans versus Democrats as Tweedledum versus, which, I mean, it isn't quite like, I mean, if abortion is outlawed, that's a real thing, right? On the other hand, in the spectrum of all possible points of view you could take on human society and its future, I mean, the two U.S. political parties they're very, very close together in the spectrum of all possible human points of view. So the crafting of collective narratives in the end is what shapes the options that people are selecting between by the time they get to a structured decision process. And now, of course, the capitalist system has grabbed a hold of the creation of narratives, and they're just kind of spoon-fed to you by Hollywood movies and by Facebook's feed construction algorithms. So I mean, we do not have internet social media designed with the intention of fostering what you're calling right story, of sort of collective creation of a mutually meaningful
story can be
via sort of peer-to-peer back and forth.
Story is a technology, and it's a technology that can and has been weaponized, with pretty disastrous results, in order to direct and misdirect, all these big aggregate flows of everybody's, collective wisdom. This has been misdirected into steaming piles of crap. I guess yes, you need that diversity of all the stories, but you also need diversity of data sets and methods for collecting and aggregating these things. I can give an example for how we're looking at verification systems for the biodiversity offsets, biodiversity credits sort of side of things. We're bringing in a whole heap of different data sets, but one of those is actually an online game that's been around for a long time. It's got hundreds of thousands of users, and it's basically kind of like bird watching, except for everything in nature. So people go on and like they get points and credits for the things that they spot during the day, the different species. And people could go on there and lie, but there's people just down the road who, if you say there's a crow flying that way, then, it kind of gets verified by the next person who sees that crow, So, and there's some amazing analytics for that, whereby you can track the movement of a lot of, animals within urban environments, even that people are seeing, and all these kinds of things. And I don't know, for me, what's exciting about that is that it's crowdsourced, and it's a collective thing that's encouraging people to be in nature, not just save the nature in a biodiversity hotspot over there and keep people out of it, which it needs us because we have an ecological niche in there too. Instead of that, it's integrating people. So you get that data set, but that's not enough. Then you've got so you get soundscape stuff coming in as well. So, you got mics that can record terabytes of data, and just from the sounds in a natural place, you can actually measure how much biodiversity is there. You can track spikes and stuff like that. But the tech problem comes in, and where we've hit a bit of a road bump, with our indigenous protocols, is that you've got to see how these things can be weaponized. Because see, that soundscape tech can actually be turned around the other way. And they've found that they can play those sounds in a place and call all the animals in. And they can artificially, for a while, increase the biodiversity in an area by playing those sounds, and everything comes in. So then all we can see is a future, like a landscape where seasonal migration and seasonal behavior in our animals would change completely, from the seasons. Instead, it would probably start to align more with quarterly reporting, because you'd see people wanting to, increase the value of stocks in their portfolio, and they might pump and dump and play out the sounds in a place, So, we're trying to figure out how to use indigenous governance to make sure that there is appropriate accompanying social technologies, to come along with these things. And that's why it's taken so long. But, it's better than what we got so far, which is crap and rubbish. All the biodiversity, offset system has all collapsed completely because the verification systems were out of whack, and they were found to be rubbish. And in a lot of cases, your carbon credits systems are the same as well. So we're trying to sort those things out. And your indigenous logics, indigenous governance, etc. These are ways where we can do this. And it's ways where it's stuff that can be democratic, and like truly democratic. Not like gammon democratic, the models we've got now that just promote the loudest and stupidest voice to the top, but actual true collective governance that is, vibrant, dynamic, and truly distributed in terms of power, which is pretty cool. I don't know. It's all right.
Very cool. So Lisa, I've actually got to go shortly and deal with my own restless offspring who I've somehow kept out of this room for an hour.
Okay, no problem. But they're at the door. They're making progress at getting into the room. No problem at all. All right. Well, I just wanted to make sure that we did talk about the book, which we joked about briefly, but that's coming out in September. Right story, wrong story. And the other book is Sand Talk, if you want to learn more about a lot of things we were talking about. Is there a cover?
There is.
The right way around.
What's very cool about it is in the
it's okay.
in our podcast, you'll see in our podcast before, Ben, I showed you a steel boomerang, and that steel boomerang's going to be on the cover. That's on the cover of this book.
Maybe if I do that, you can see through it.
Yeah.
Well, you've got
there you go. There you go.
Can we get a nano engraver and engrave the whole book on the boomerang in really tiny print?
There you go, like a long now kind of approach.
Yeah.
Exactly. Keeping it forever. Yeah.
If you can put the book on the frisbee, you should be able to put right story, wrong story on the boomerang.
Okay, and I have one more plug for the writing contest we've got going on at Mindplex right now. Be sure to check that out, and be sure to watch the podcast itself that we have with Tyson and Megan that you're just gonna love.
Yeah, that's right.
I'll get ChatGPT to do it for me.
To not do it for you, but tell you it did very enthusiastically. Whoa. Yes.
As you pointed out, ChatGPT cannot yet win an essay contest, even at the middle school level. I don't think, but it could certainly shorten your writing process if you're willing to fact check the stuff that it comes up with.
It has some indigenous logics. It has like it has a situational bias, as we do, you know. It has situational bias rather than dispositional bias in its logic, which I found pretty cool. I found that comforting. So there are some indigenous logics in ChatGPT, which is pretty cool. Anyway, you'll have to look those things up.
That's interesting. We'll have to follow up more on that. I may actually hit you up for that.
Basically saying it's not judgy.
It's not judgy. Yeah, that's an easy way of saying it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to let you go.
You can nudge it to be judgy without too much effort. But you have to
makes you want, judgy in, judgy out. Yeah,
the nudge.
Exactly. Right.
Choice architecture. Let's get it done.
All right. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you at the next.
Thanks a lot. And look at we talked about other stuff here. Then I didn't feel like just
very
repeating
different
ourselves.
Right. That's what we like to do.
In the podcast itself, we talked a bunch about AGI and intelligence and indigenous views of intelligence and relationship of mind to place and so forth. And I think that was also quite interesting. But I'm glad we got to dig into the governance bit as well.
Yes, definitely. All right. So
everybody,
thank you very much.
Everyone
you,
buy
Tyson.
Tyson's.
Thank you, Megan.
Go buy Sand Talk now. Buy Right Story, Wrong
Buy all
Story
the books.
In September.
Buy the books.
Expand
buy
your
Megan's
minds,
book when she writes one.
Yeah. Write a book yourself.
But I really encourage you to look both of them up because it's really interesting. It was really funny. No, you don't need to write a book. I was just making a joke. But anyway, it's very interesting looking you up and the projects that you're working on. It was a little bit of a very fun rabbit hole in itself. I encourage people to do that. All right. We'll see you next time on the Mindplex Pubcast.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.